Hey guys, this is Parker here from Test Prep Champions, and today I'm going to be answering a question about fractions and the GED math. So let me read that question. So the question from the test taker is, I'm in the process of trying to get my GED. Does anyone, first of all, right on, awesome, good stuff. I'm in the process of trying to get my GED. Does anyone have suggestions for processes to make fractions easier? All right, and so you go on to say specifically multiplication and division of fractions and multiplying a fraction by a whole number. One example being 15 times 2 3/4. What I'm looking for is the process to do it, tips to make it easier to remember, both for working out the problems mentally as well as solving problems on paper. Okay, so fractions. So fractions can be a little scary or a little tricky, a little bit confusing for people, and they're really not that bad once you get the hang of it, although I used to always like working in decimals, and a lot of people think decimals are easier, but then once you get the hang of fractions, most people find that fractions are even easier. I used to rather to work in decimals, but now I would rather work in fractions, honestly. But when it comes to fractions, though, there's really 5 or 6 main things that you have to understand, okay? And this video, I'm just going to give you a crash course. I'm just going to go right through. As soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to switch the screen and type some things out. Just do some drawing on the dry erase board, or the digital dry erase board, whatever you want to call it for you. And I'm just going to go through these 5 or 6 main things off the top of my head. I'm just going to make up some problems as I go. So it might get kind of interesting because I don't know how it's going to turn out. But I don't want to waste your time because I'm sure you're busy. If you weren't serious about taking the GED, you wouldn't be asking a question like this. So I'm going to give you my best shot here. I'm going to give you my best rundown of what you need to know because I want you to pass the test, and that's why I'm spending my time to do this. I want you to pass, and I think you can. So let's get started. So basically, you gotta know the definitions first and know what you're working with. So you gotta know what's the numerator, what's the denominator, what's a mixed number, what's an improper fraction, okay? And so right off the bat, if you're not sure what I'm talking about when I say that stuff, you're at a disadvantage. So we're going to go over that. And so then the next thing that is really important to know after the basic terminology, I would say, is converting between mixed numbers and improper fractions. And that's insanely important. It really is. And it's not that hard. Because in the example you had 15 times 2 3/4. So 2 3/4, that's a mixed number. Okay, so what you would want to do, the strategy, how I would probably do it is I would convert that 2 3/4, that mixed number, I would convert that into an improper fraction, okay? So the way you would do it is you take the denominator, which is the 4, multiply by the whole number, so you do 2 times 4, that's going to give you 8, and then you would add the numerator, right? So you got 8, and then you have 3, okay? So add that, you're going to get 11, okay? And you keep the denominator the same. So you would have 15 over 1 times 11 over 4. And in that case, all you do is 15 times 11, divide by 4. I don't have a calculator in front of me here that's within grasp easily. So that's how you would do it. And of course, I'm going to show you how to do this more in depth here. But basically, in order for any of that to work, the first thing that you'd have to know how to do is how to convert between an improper fraction and a mixed number, and vice versa. So if you can't do that, you're not going to be able to solve a problem like that. That's just the bottom line. Okay, so you got to know how to do that. So that's the second thing we're going to cover. We're also going to talk about simplifying fractions, very important stuff, and then addition and subtraction with fractions, which I think that's actually a little easier than multiplication and division. Or no, I should say the other way around. It's a little harder than multiplication and division because you have to get a common denominator first. For addition and subtraction with fractions, you need a common denominator. With multiplication and division, you don't. So we'll look at how you do all of that, and then I'm going to kind of bring it home for a landing and talk about equivalence, decimal and fraction equivalence. I'll give you some how to go from a fraction to a decimal and vice versa. I'll give you some things that you can memorize if you want, some tricks to make it a little easier. But the key thing is, understand the basics. And I'm going to give you the basics here. So, I'm not going to be able to go really that in depth because this is probably, I tend to ramble, so this might go on longer than I want it to, but I want to just get to the point here to show you the raw basics of all of the stuff that I just told you we were going to cover, those 5 or 6 things. And if you understand the basics, you're going to be fine. You're going to be able to get problems like the one that you asked. They're going to be a breeze if you understand the basic concepts, okay? Might seem a little tricky now, but if you understand the basics, you'll be able to reason your way through, okay? And so we'll go through that stuff. And, as far as how to do it in your head versus on paper, why do you need to do it in your head? Why does that matter? You don't have to do it in your head. On the GED, you're going to have a dry erase board, or you're going to have scratch paper, throughout the whole test that you can use. So I wouldn't worry too much about doing it in your head. Once you get the hang of it, and you get in the swing of it, and you start to see patterns, sure, there'll be some shortcuts and some mental shortcuts that you can take as you get more experience, but I wouldn't worry about that too much. I mean, if I was taking a test like this, I wouldn't be doing it in my head. Trust me, I would be writing it out, because the more stuff that you keep in your head and that you try to do in your head, it's gonna conflict. You're just gonna confuse yourself. It's all gonna jumble around in there. It's gonna be hard to get the right answer. I mean, math is tricky. Math is hard. Why make it harder on yourself? That's what I always say. But anyway, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. But what I can do is I'm going to give you a quick crash course on all the basics. And so let's get going here. And I really hope that you find this helpful. Okay, so the first thing that we want to get clear on here is the basic terminology. Okay, so there's 3 different types of fractions that you have to know. And I'm going to try to make this very simple, very straightforward, not overcomplicated. So, rather than using big fancy math terms, I just kind of put this all out here. I'm going to make up a lot of this as we go along here, so hopefully this is going to help you out. So the first thing to understand is your basic or your proper fraction. It's got a number on top, which we call the numerator, and the number in the bottom we call the denominator. Now, how in the world are you going to remember that? Well, here's how you remember it, okay? The top number is the numerator. Now, I have a really silly, really stupid way of helping people to remember that. So if you think of salad dressing, right? If you think of the brand Newman salad dressing, you think, well, Newman salad dressing, you put that on top of your salad, okay? So the top number in the fraction is the numerator, okay? So Newman salad dressing goes on top of your salad, and the numerator is the top number in the fraction. I know, it is really stupid, really silly, but I almost guarantee this is going to help you remember it. So the denominator is a little bit easier to remember, right? Because the denominator, the D sound. So the denominator is downstairs, or it's in the dungeon. Okay, so the denominator, the bottom number in the fraction, the numerator is the top part in the fraction, okay? Pretty simple, but that is very, very important to understand that. Okay, so this is a regular fraction or a proper fraction. So an improper fraction, let me switch this up. Basically, the way you know it's an improper fraction is because the number on top, the numerator, is bigger than the number on the bottom. So for example, 4/3, okay, that's an improper fraction. The numerator is bigger than the denominator. So a mixed number is going to have a whole number out front, like a 2, and well, this is just an example, so let's say 2 2/5 maybe. I don't know, this is just an example here. But the point is it's going to have a whole number and it's going to have a fraction with it. And what you're going to want to, the next thing that you want to do after you get these basics down, so you want to make sure you can identify a proper fraction, an improper fraction, and a mixed number. Because you might get a question that asks you, is this an improper fraction, a mixed number, or a proper fraction? Or you might get something like that. But you really want to know that. So that's the first thing to work on, and make sure you have that down. It's pretty straightforward. So the next thing that you want to know is how to go from an improper fraction to a mixed number and vice versa. So let's take a look at that. So we want to look at how to convert an improper fraction to a mixed number and vice versa. You're going to want to get this skill down. It's not that hard, although at first it can be a little bit tricky. So I think it's a little bit easier to go from the mixed number to the improper fraction. So let's start with that. So let's go with an example here. Let's try 3 1/2, okay? So this is a mixed number, right? We've got the whole number out front and we've got our fraction here. So how do we convert that to an improper fraction? Well, what you want to do is you want to look at the denominator. So look at the 2, okay? And you want to multiply the denominator by the whole number, okay? So we would do 2 times 3, okay? And then you're going to add the numerator, okay, or the top number here, the 1. Okay, so let's add the 1. right? So here's what you do. You take you take the denominator, which is our 2, right? And then you take the whole number here, which is our 3, and we're going to multiply those two numbers together, and we're going to add our numerator. So 2 times 3 is 6, okay, plus 1 is going to be 7. But we're not done yet, okay? So we've got 7. The last step is to take the same exact denominator from the mixed number and you just rewrite it down here. And in this case, we're done, all right? So again, you take the same exact denominator and you just pop it right in there. So we've got 7 over 2. So that's our mixed number, okay? Or that's our improper fraction, okay? So that's how you're always going to do those. It's pretty simple once you get the hang of it. But going backwards can be a little bit trickier for some students for some reason. And so here's the best way I have to explain it quickly, because I don't want to take up too much of your time. I just want to get this out here quickly for you. So you're going to want to start with the numerator, okay? Or start with the denominator, and you want to think, what number can I multiply the numerator by? What number can I multiply the denominator by that's going to give me something close to the 7, but less than 7? Okay, so let me think here. Let's think here. So let's think of our 2 times tables, right? So 2 times 1 gives us 2, right? Last time I checked. Hopefully that's still how it works. But yeah, it is. That's a joke. And then we've got 2 times 2. That's going to give us 4. All right, 2 times 3 is going to give us 6. So I'll keep you on your toes here a little bit with some basic math. But I think this is going to help to write this out so you see where I'm going with this. And then 2 times 4 is going to give us 8, right? If you can read my writing. If I could read my own writing, we'll get 8. Okay, and so we want to basically think, what number is going to give us, what can we multiply 2 by that gives us a number close to 7 that's less than 7 still? So we want to get as close as we can. So 2 times 4 gives us 8. So since 8 is greater than 7, we're just going to get this out of the ballpark, okay? So since 2 times 3 gives us 6, well, 6 is a number that's less than 7, so that's probably what we're going to want to go with. So we'll go with our 3 here, okay? So again, so keep your 2 down here in the denominator, all right? And we're going to multiply 2 by 3, okay? And at this point, we still don't know what this number is, but here's how we get it. So 2 times 3 gives us 6, right? So then you take the 6 and you take this, okay, so go back to the numerator, which is your 7, and you do 7 minus 6, all right, and that's going to give us 1, okay? So we just went from the mixed number, we went from the improper fraction to the mixed number, and so we just did both. And so I want to give you guys one more example of going from a mixed number to an improper fraction. So we'll do one more example of that, and then we'll move on to the next part here. But this is a really important skill to be able to have at your fingertips. So let me give one more example here. So I'll just write it over here. Let's see, how about, I don't know, I'll just make this up. Let's say 5, that's not really a good one. Let's do maybe 15 over 4. How about that? Okay, so we want to write 15 over 4 as a mixed number. So we've got the improper fraction. We want to go to a mixed number. So first thing you want to do is think about, I want to multiply 4 by some number that's going to give me a product that's close to 15 but less than 15. Okay, so what number can I multiply 4 by that's going to give me something less than 15? Okay, so a good way to do that would be to just start listing your 4 times tables, okay? So 4 times 1 is 4, so we can skip that. 4 times 2 is going to give us 8. And 4, that is an 8 by the way. 4 times 3 is 12. And then 4 times 4 gives you 16. Right? And so 16, that's going to be bigger than 15. That's out right away. Okay, and so there's no need to go any higher because if 4 times 4 is bigger than 15, 4 times 5 will be bigger than 15, and so on up until infinity. So that doesn't matter. So we want 4 multiplied by some number that gives us a number that's close to 15 but a little bit less. So it looks like 4 times 12 is going to work. That's going to be perfect, all right? So you wouldn't do 4 times 2 because 8, 8's a number that is less than 15, okay? Or I mean, you wouldn't do 2 because 4 times 2 gives us 8, which is a number that's less than 15, but we can do a little bit better. We can get a little bit closer. 12 is a little bit closer, so we're going to go with the 3 here, okay? So here's where we're at. We've got 4 is going to be our denominator, and so we've picked 3. 3 is going to be the whole number here, okay? So 4 times 3 is 12, okay? So how do we know which number goes up here? Well, okay, so we go back here to the numerator, which was 15. All right, so we'll put 15 here, okay? And then we just subtract the 12. Okay, so 15 minus 12 is going to give us 3. So the answer is going to be 3, okay? 3 and 3/4. Okay, so and you can always go back the other way and check this too, right? So make sure you're correct. That's the good thing about these kind of problems is you have a way to check yourself. So 4 times 3 is 12, okay? Plus 3 is going to give us 15. So that's how we know that that's correct, okay? So hopefully that makes sense here. But you don't always, and again, on a test, once you get used to this, you don't necessarily have to write out 4 times 1, 4 times 2, 4 times 3, 4 times 4. I just did that because I wanted to show you kind of the thought process as you're getting the basics down. But that's the idea. So it's really important to understand how to do that. So those are some basic skills with fractions. You got to know those two things. So let's see, we're going to move on here now. I want to show you something else. I want to look at simplifying fractions next. Okay, so as far as simplifying fractions goes, this is a skill that you're going to get this as you practice, but this is something that's very important to know how to do. I just want to show a few basic examples of this because I think the best way to get this is to really work on it on your own, but I'll give you an example or two here. So let's start off really basic here, okay? So let's look at a fraction here, 2 over 4, okay? So what we can do is we can simplify this fraction down even further into simplest form, okay? So let's say, what's 2 divided by 2? All right, so if we do 2 divided by 2, that's going to give us 1, okay? And so if we divide 4 by 2, we get 2, okay? So we've simplified this fraction down, all right? And so I also want you to note that if you do 1 times 2, okay, you're going to get 2. And so then let's multiply the bottom by 2, and you would get 4. Okay, so you can go back and forth, but you always want to try to put it in the simplest form. Okay, so here's another example here. So let me do something like, let's do maybe 4 over 10. Okay, that's a good one. 4 over 10. Okay, so how can we simplify this? So the first thing you always want to ask is, can I divide 4 into 10? And the answer is not evenly, no. So what you can always do is you can just, with even numbers, you can always divide by 2, right? So you would do 4 divided by 2. You can do 10 divided by 2. And so 4 divided by 2 is going to be 2. And 10 divided by 2 is going to be 5, okay? And so now this is in simplest form, okay? You can't, if you do 2 divided by 2, you get 1, but you can't do 5 divided by 2. That's not going to work evenly, right? That's going to give you a decimal. It's going to give you a weird number that we don't want to work with. So we would say that that's in simplest form. Okay, and so let me give you one more example here. Let's say, let me think here a second. What would be a good one to do? How about 4 over 12? If I were to tell you, how do you put 4 over 12 in the simplest form? Well, there's 2 ways you could do it, but the first, okay, what always works with even numbers, usually always work to simplify a fraction is divide the top number by 2 and divide the bottom number by 2. So if you do 4 divided by 2, you get 2 here, and you do 12 divided by 2, you get 6. All right, we're done. Actually, no, we're not done. Hopefully you were paying attention and you see why we're not done here. We're not done because 2 divided by 6 is not in simplest form yet. Okay, we can reduce it even further. How can we? Well, divide 2 by 2, that gives you 1. Divide 6 by 2, you get 3. So we're down to 1/3. We are now in the simplest form. Okay, so if you're watching this, you might have had this idea. Some people that might be a little bit faster with the math already saw this. But if we go back up here to the 4/12, okay, what you can really do is you can divide. You could have seen, well, you know, I can divide 4 by 4, and I can do 12 divided by 4. Okay, and so what that would give you is, that's going to just give you 1/3, right? So that's one step, okay? So rather than dividing by 2, then dividing by 2 again, if you would have seen this right off the bat, that you could do 4 divided by 4, 12 divided by 4, get it right to simplest form, would have saved you some time, but it doesn't really matter, however you want to do it. You know, a good thing, like I said, a good trick, whenever you need to simplify something, just divide by 2, and you might have to divide by 2 again, and you might have to do it again, you might have to do it again and again, and it might take you some time, but you'll get the right answer if you do it that way. But I would practice these, and you'll kind of get an eye for how to simplify it, but this is really important. For the sake of time, I want to kind of keep moving here, so we're not going to go too crazy in depth with this as we go. I want to get into some division and subtraction, multiplication, that kind of stuff with fractions, and maybe I'll try to work in a few examples. Like I said, I'm kind of winging this off the top of my head because I want to get this out to you really fast so you can get to work right away. But I'll try to include an example or two in there about how to simplify fractions. So I know this is kind of bare bones, basic stuff, but if you get this basic idea, you practice it, okay, you'll be able to do this just like that, okay, once you see the basic idea. Okay, so now we're getting into addition and subtraction with fractions, and let's add an S on here, fractions. So addition and subtraction with fractions. So let me just give you an example. I think one of the best ways to get this is to just see some examples. So let's do 2/5, and we want to add that to 1/4. So I'm going to keep these numbers really small for two reasons. Number one, because I'm going off the top of my head here. I don't have a calculator handy, so I'm just using small numbers here. And number two, because I want you guys to really get the basics here. So I want you to really get the basics, and then once you get the basics, you can reason your way through other problems. But go ahead and pause the video, try to do this on your own, and then I'll show you how to do it. Okay, so what you really need to do is you want to get a common denominator. So the key with addition and subtraction with fractions is to get a common denominator. So we need a common denominator, and what that means really is, it's a fancy way of saying we need the denominators to be the same exact number. Okay, so we've got a 5 in this denominator and a 4 in this denominator. They're not the same number, so what are we going to do? Okay, so here's a cool trick. All right, so let's look at 2/5. Okay, so we want to get these denominators to be the same. So I want to look at the other fraction, and I note that the denominator of this fraction is 4. Okay, so let me go back over here to fraction 1, let's call it. And I want to multiply the bottom number and the top number by 4. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to this fraction here, the 1/4. Let's call it fraction 2. And I'm going to look at the denominator of fraction 1. So the denominator of fraction 1 was 5. So back over to fraction 2. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to multiply the denominator, and I'm going to multiply the numerator by the 5. Okay? So now let me rewrite this. So 2 times 4 is 8. And 5 times 4 is going to be, I'm drawing arrows so you can follow what I'm doing here, is going to be 20. Okay, and so then 1 times 5 is going to be 5. And 4 times 5 is going to be 20. Okay, and so you might be thinking, you know, can't I simplify this down, right? 8 and 20, can I reduce that and put it in simplest form? Well, you're going to defeat the point if you do that, because if you put it in simplest form, you divide 8 by 4, you divide 20 by 4, that gets you right back to 2/5. So you're right back where you started, basically. So it's a good, if you were thinking that, that's the right thought process, or if you were thinking, can I reduce 5/20 down? Well, we just multiplied in order to get the common denominator. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to simplify it until the final answer, okay? So here we go. We're going to do, so what you do is right off the bat, we've got a common denominator. We've got a 20 here. We've got a 20 there. So you could just write that over here. Okay, so the 20 is not going to change. All right, but up here, so 8 plus 5 gives us 13. So you do want to add those numbers up. So the denominator stays the same, okay, and you add the numerator. So we've got 13 over 20. We can't simplify that down any further because because 13 is an odd number. We can't simplify that down any further. So that's going to be the answer. Okay, so let's look at an example with subtraction now. Let me try to think of some new numbers. Let's make it a little bit more interesting. Let's do like 11 over, let's see. I don't want to do that. Yeah, let's do like 1 over 11 maybe. We'll do that. Okay. 1 over 11 minus, let's try like 2/5. Let's just do that. Okay, so I want to subtract these. And so the very first thing whenever you have an addition or a subtraction problem, you want to look and you want to see if you've got a common denominator. So let's call this fraction 1. Fraction 1, the denominator is 11. Fraction 2, the denominator is 5. We do not have common denominators, so we need to get the denominators to be the same. So the fastest way to do it is to look at your fraction 1 here first, okay? And so I want you to then look at fraction 2 and look at the number in the denominator over in fraction 2. So that's going to be 5. So go back to fraction 1 and multiply the top and the bottom by 5. Okay, so now let's look at our fraction 2 here. So what you want to do is go back to fraction 1 and look at the denominator, which was 11. Okay, so then go back to fraction 2, and we're going to multiply the denominator and the numerator by 11. Okay, and so now let's rewrite this. So we've got 5 times 1 is going to be 5. And 5 times 11 is going to be 55. So we're really getting up there. And then we're going to do 2 times 11. Let's see. 2 times 11 is going to be 22. And then down here we're going to have, let's see, 55. Okay. All right, and so we're going to get a negative number here, but that's okay. So what you would do is you would do 5 minus 22, okay, and that's going to give you a negative number. That's going to be negative 17 over 55. So we'll throw in a little bit of negative numbers there as a bonus. Okay, but the point is that you keep the denominators the same, and you just subtract the numerators. Okay, so in this case, since 5, you got 5 minus 22, that's going to be negative 17, okay, and we keep the denominators the same. So hopefully this helps here, but the key is you want to look at the denominators. You want to make them common denominators, and one of the best tricks to do it is to multiply by the reciprocal, or I guess that's not really the right way to put it here, but you want to look at the denominator of the first fraction and look at the denominator in the second fraction, take that number, multiply the top and bottom of the first number of the first fraction by the denominator of the second fraction, and vice versa. It's a pretty cool trick to do it, and the numbers will usually work out a little bit nicer than negative 17 over 55 and 13 over 20, but hopefully you get the main idea. Get that common denominator, and then go to work, and then you want to check and see if your answer is in simplest form. So along the way, you don't ever want to do 2 times 4, 5 times 4, you get 8 over 20, and then simplify that, right? Because you're just going to go back. So if you simplify that, you get right back to where you started. Okay. But your answer, you want to always check if your answer is in simplest form, and in this case, they both are. So nothing to do there, but that's the basics. So now we're going to move on to multiplication and division. which is a lot easier, and then we'll look at a combination problem or two, and then I think we've just about covered the basics here. Okay, so let's keep rolling along here, and this is actually even easier than addition and subtraction, I think at least. I think most students agree with me. Multiplication and division with fractions. So it's a lot easier because you don't need to get a common denominator, okay? You just multiply right across. And so let's go with, I'm making these up here, let's do 3/5. And again, we're working with small numbers here because I want to give you the basics. And let's do maybe 2, let's do 2/3. Okay, so what you want to do here is you just multiply right across, right? So you do 3 times 2, that's going to give you 6, and 5 times 3, that's going to give you 15, okay? And so you just multiply right across, right? You just do 3 times 2, and you do 5 times 3, right? So you don't need to get a common denominator, that's all you do. So 6/15, and this is a good example of a problem that you can simplify down. And you know what? This is actually a very good example because you can't use the 2 trick, right? I showed you can always divide by 2. Well, 15 divided by 2 is not going to give you a nice even number. So go ahead, pause the video, try to simplify 6/15. Okay, so hopefully you tried that on your own. And so all you want to do here, in this case, you're going to divide 6 by 3 and divide 15 by 3. So 6 divided by 3 is going to be 2, and 2 divided by 15, or no, 6 divided by 3 is 2, 15 divided by 3 is going to give us 5, so the final answer is going to be 2/5. Okay, and now some people might have seen, there's a trick here, right? So you got 3/5 and 2/3, and I'm not a huge fan of this trick because I think a lot of people, they hear about cross multiplication or they learn that somewhere in high school, and for whatever reason, when they hear cross multiplication, okay, they get thrown off a lot. So I don't usually like to teach this trick that much, but although it is a lot faster. So when you see 3/5 and 2/3, okay, what we could have done is you could have said, hey, there's a 3 here, there's a 3 here. Well, I can divide 3 out of each fraction, and if you divide 3 by 3, you get 1. 3 by 3 is 1. So you have 1/5 times 2/1. Well, that's 2/5. So you can do it that way. But let me explain quickly why I don't like to teach that way too much. So, okay, so let's say that you had like 3/5 equals, let's say, x over 5, right? And so if you wanted to solve this for x, well, what you would do is you would cross multiply, right? So you would take this 5, multiply it by the 3, right? And so 5 times 3 is 15 over 5 equals x. All right, here's a good simplification practice for you. What's 15? 15 divided by 5, how would you simplify that? All right, so go ahead. If you want, you could try that on your own quickly. But basically, what you do is 15 divided by 5 is 3, 5 divided by 5 is 1, so it's 3. X is going to be 3. So that's an example of multiplying across, okay? But what you don't ever want to do, right? So if we go back to the original example, we had 3/5 times 2/3. So for some reason, when people think about cross multiplication, they want to try to do something like this. So they want to do 3 times 3 and 5 times 2, and then they think, well, 5 times 2, that gives us 10. 3 times 3, that gives us 9. Okay, that's completely not how you do it. So you cross multiply when you've got an equal sign in between, okay, the two sides of the equation, okay? Which is not, when you're multiplying and dividing with fractions, if you don't have an x, if you don't got some kind of variable in there, you're not really going to be doing that, okay? You're not going to do that. Okay, so keep it very simple and just go straight across, right? So let me give you one more example here. Or, let me just teach you how to do it with division. So basically, here's how you do it with division. So if you've got, say, 4, let's say you've got like 4/5. All right, now we've got a division sign divided by 2/3. So how do we solve this? Well, basically, all you want to do is you just take this side of the equation here and you're going to flip it upside down and rewrite it with multiplication. So The first fraction, the 4/5, okay, we're going to leave that as it is. And so turn this division sign into a multiplication sign, okay? And then you flip the second fraction. So what I mean by that is you do 3/2. So you completely rewrite it, okay? And so now it's just a multiplication problem, okay? And you just multiply across, right? So you just go right across. So 4 times 3 is going to be 12. And 5 times 2 is going to be 10, okay? And here's another simplification example. So we simplify this down. And so let's see, we can take out of 2, so 12, divide that by 2, we get 6. 10, divide that by 2, we get 5. So we get 6/5, final answer. So that's the main thing with division, is you just want to, you take the second fraction, you flip it, and you multiply. Let me do one more example over here. We use up all the space before we move on. So let's say we've got, I don't know, 3/2, and we divide that by 5/5/6, let's say. Okay, so we don't need to get a common denominator or anything like that because it's division. So the first thing you always check when you have fractions, is it addition and subtraction or multiplication and division? Okay, and so in this case it's division, so we don't need common denominator. So what we do is we want to rewrite it as a multiplication problem. So leave the first fraction alone, so 3/2, and so you rewrite it as multiplication, but you flip this number upside down. So I can't even read my own writing, but I do remember that that was 5/6. So we flip it upside down. We've got 6/5, and I do apologize for the cramped space here, but I want to use up all the space here. So 3 times 6 is going to give us 18. 2 times 5 gives us 10. Okay, so we've got, let me move this down here. Okay, so we've got 18/10. Okay, and so we can simplify this down. 18 divided by 2, let's say, is going to be 9, and then 10 divided by 2 is going to give us 5. Okay, so perfect. So now we've got an improper fraction. We can turn this into, here we go, perfect. We can turn that into a mixed number. Okay, so how do you rewrite 9/5 as a mixed number? So you can pause the video, and I'm really testing your attention span here because I am kind of all over the place. This is very cluttered, so I do apologize for that. But we've got 9/5. We want to turn that into a mixed number. So the way you do it is, again, you want to take the 5 and you want to multiply that by a whole number that's going to get you something close to 9, but a little bit less than 9. So 5 times 2 is going to give us 10, right? So 10, it's too big, right? So 5 times 1 gives us 5. In this case, that's about as close as we're going to get. So we've got the whole number is going to be 1, and we've got 5 down here. Okay, so what number is going to go up here? What's going to be the numerator? Okay, so remember, you take the numerator in the improper fraction, that's 9, and you're going to subtract by 5. Okay, and the reason you subtract by 5 is because you do 5 times 1. That's the number that you plug into the formula here. So we do 9 minus 5, that's going to be 4. So we've got 1 4/5 as the final answer there. So that's the basics of multiplication and division with fractions. So you're probably you might see some problems where you've got multiplication and division, addition, subtraction, all kind of mixed in. You might see some word problems with this stuff, but I think if you understand all of these basics, you're pretty much set. So I want to do one more quick video here, one more quick sequence where I talk about turning fractions into decimals and vice versa. I don't really want to get into too much about decimals or anything like that here. I just want to show you some really basic stuff that's going to be important to know, and how to use your calculator. So we're going to take a look at that, and then that should pretty much wrap up everything you need to know. Okay, so I typed some of these out here so that, because my handwriting is pretty atrocious, but just so you know, like this 1 divided by 10, what that means is that's like writing 1/10 as a fraction, 1/8, same thing. But anyway, so just so you know how to read this. But these are just some values that are really important. And the main idea here is that fractions and decimals are always going to be equivalent, okay? And if you use a calculator, you can always turn a fraction into a decimal very, very, very easily. Okay, so let's say you had 1/4, right? and you wanted to turn that into a decimal. So all you would do is you put 1 in your calculator and hit the divide button. So you do 1 divided by 4, and it's going to give you 0.25, okay? And so you can do that with any number, any fraction ever, okay? It doesn't matter what it is. You just take the numerator and you divide by the denominator, and you're always going to get the decimal equivalent, right? So another way to say that is just take the top number in the fraction, hit the divide button, hit the bottom number of the fraction, press equals, and you're going to get the decimal value. So it's really easy to do it that way. It's very fast. So converting a fraction into a decimal is really easy as long as you've got your calculator. And for most of the questions, you'll be able to use your calculator. Now, going from a decimal into a fraction, that's not really something you can do. That's kind of something that you just have to memorize. So I wrote these values out here. If you really want to just blow your GED test away, you'll want to memorize these. If you're just looking to pass, which that's fine. I mean, some people, they're not necessarily trying to get a perfect score or trying to just ace the thing. They just want to pass. Here are some that you'll definitely want to know. So you definitely want to know like 0.25 is 1/4, and you'll definitely want to know that 0.75 is 3/4, and you want to know that 0.5 is equal to a half, okay, at the very least. And I always tell people to think about quarters, okay? So if you've got 1/4, okay, you've got 25 cents. If you've got 2 quarters, you've got 50 cents. And if you've got 3/4, that's going to be 75 cents, okay? 4 quarters gives you $1. So 1/4, 0.25. If you've got 1/4, that's going to be 25 cents. All right, so hopefully you're getting the drift here. Another easy thing to remember is whenever you've got like a 0.3 or you've got 0.2 or 0.7, whatever it is, okay, you can always just write that, take the decimal, take the number, write it over 10, right? So what I mean by that is, so 0.3, okay, all you would do is you just take that 3, you just, say, hey, well, we have a 3 here, so the fraction is going to be 3/10, okay? And so if I gave you 0.2, and let's say that you didn't have these values memorized, and you wanted to put that into a fraction form, you would just say, well, 0.2. Okay, so you just want to remember that you can rewrite that as 2/10. Okay, and now you can simplify that down into 1/5 if you want, but I just want to kind of show you that. Okay, and you can remember that vice versa too. Like you can remember it the other way in case you can't use your calculator. Any number over 10, okay, is going to be point that number, okay? Basically speaking, for our purposes, you can remember that. So like, 4/10, you can think of that, that's going to be 0.4, and 0.4 is going to be 4/10. Again, you can simplify that down. 4/10, you can simplify that down to 2/5, which you see here. But that kind of helps you memorize that. But definitely these values here, like I said, you can kind of think of it like quarters to remember 1/4, 2/4, which is a half, and 3/4. But these are all good values to remember if you want to. So you can put these down on your notes. And these aren't the only good fractions to remember. There's some other ones that I didn't put on here, but this is just a good list to get you started with fraction and decimal equivalents. So just always remember that you can turn a fraction into a decimal and vice versa, but turning a decimal into a fraction, there's not really a good trick to do it. So basically you just want to memorize some certain values. There's some tricks you can remember, but for the most part, it's just memorization. But fraction and decimal is always very easy. So hopefully this helps you out here. So just as a recap, what we did was we started off with looking at improper fractions, proper fractions, mixed numbers. We defined the numerator and the denominator, and we looked at how to go back and forth between improper and mixed numbers. Then we looked at simplifying fractions, and we did addition with fractions, subtraction, multiplication, division. And so I wanted to end here by giving you some values that you can memorize if you want. Put these down in your notes. If you don't want to memorize these, at least memorize the ones that I circled here at the very least. And so this isn't an exhaustive coverage here. If I was doing a course or teaching a class or something, or working with you one-on-one, of course I would want to go way more in depth, and I could do so many more examples. there's just a lot more complicated examples that I could have gotten into here. But really, this is the basic stuff. This is as basic as it gets, but this is really as hard as it gets too, okay? You're going to get some more complex examples, but if you understand the basics, if you really understand everything in this video, and you just go practice a lot of practice problems on fractions, you're going to get it. You really will. I mean, it doesn't get that much harder. I mean, this is very easy lower level fraction stuff, but like I said, it doesn't get that much harder. The approach is going to be the same. The thought process is going to be the same. You just got to find what works for you. You know, there's other ways to think about the material too, besides what I just said. But if you really understand everything in this video here, like I said, you can make yourself a checklist. You know, do you remember the numerator, the denominator, the improper fractions, mixed numbers, etc., how to simplify fractions, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division with fractions? You know, just make yourself a little checklist of that stuff. Go practice it. Really, the only thing that we didn't get into here were word problems with fractions and word problems with decimals, but you'll get some practice with that as you go along. And just remember that fractions, you know, they show up on the GED test quite frequently, but it's just a small portion of the test. Okay, you're probably going to get some questions with fractions, but it's not going to be like the whole test. It's going to be fractions, fractions, fractions. So just practice, learn those basics here, and if there's anything that I need clarification on because I probably misspoke or went way too fast or didn't make things very clear because I just kind of gunned right through this video, so don't hesitate to reach out to me in the comments, message me, go on my website and get at me that way. But definitely seek clarification with me, or if there's a topic you need more trouble on, you know, get into your prep books, get into other YouTube videos, other channels, whatever, however you want to do it. Get to work and keep going. But I really hope that this helps you out. So like I said, the basics are the most important thing. If you understand these fundamentals, they're never going to change. Make sure you understand the fundamentals. And from there, once you get the basic stuff down, everything else is going to fall in line. You just need some more practice and you'll get do some more complicated problems once you get the basic things here. And probably within a day or two, if you just work on this for a couple hours, I guarantee you're going to feel a lot better about fractions. So hopefully this helped. Thanks again for watching.